health disparities in benign urology, gaps and bridges. So when we talk about health disparities, I think it's good to go to the experts at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, who define health disparities as a health difference that adversely affects disadvantaged populations. And the resolution of health disparities would actually lead to health equity, which is what we're going to end up talking about. When we talk about health disparities, we have to identify the sources, the causes of health disparities, and they are multiple. So we typically talk about social and genetic determinants of health. This is a Dahlgren Whitehead rainbow. You've probably seen this before, where it defines the various things that contribute to health disparities. A lot of them are general socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions. What kind of food do you eat? Where does it come from? How educated are you? What's your work environment like? Are you employed? What's the water quality and sanitation like where you live? Do you have access to healthcare services? What kind of housing do you live in? Do you have a good social and community network around you? And what kind of individual lifestyle factors that you're actually responsible for could be contributing to your health disparities. And within this, in the center of this, are age, sex, and constitutional factors, which do include genetics. And so we'll examine all of this in light of lower urinary tract dysfunction. And I'm going to focus on BPH LUTs because that's actually what I study. We know epidemiologically that there are lots of risk factors that have been associated with the development or progression of BPH LUTs, and some of them are listed here. Some of them have been shown to increase the risk of BPH LUTs, like age, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, etc. Some have been shown to decrease the risk of BPH LUTs, like increasing physical activity, decreasing alcohol intake, increasing vegetable consumption. So let's look at some of these, but look at them in terms of health disparities. There have been several studies, not that many though, if you look them up in PubMed. This one I'm going to show you is from Cristal et al., but there are others that pretty much support the results of this one. And here, what they're looking at are predictors of BPH risk and severity. And they've got two models here. One is where they controlled for all other variables in the model except baseline IPSS, that's model 1. And one where they controlled for all the variables, including IPSS. And one of the first risk factors we look at here is age. And I think you can see the very significant p-value here for both models, looking at age as it relates to risk for developing BPH LUTs and actually developing progressive or severe BPH LUTs. So age is a major risk factor. When we look at race ethnicity, and here they're holding the white individuals in their study group to 1, you can see that the risk for developing BPH is higher for people of color in each model, and the risk for developing severe BPH is higher for people of color in both models as well. So race does actually have, in and of itself, contributes to health disparities and different risk factors for that. So where does that come from? Why is that? So here we have to actually look at the social and the genetic determinants of health and see what's going on here and how these might be contributing to health disparities in lower urinary tract function. So looking at social determinants of health, there have been several studies done. I'm going to show you one here from Folk et al. Using the Southern Community Cohort Study, where they looked at IPSS, which is International Prostate Symptom Score. I probably should have said that on the previous slide. And the prevalence of moderate severe LUTs, they show that those were not significantly associated with race per se, but higher IPSS scores were significantly associated with lower income, marital status, and source of insurance. And some of these become encapsulated in what we would call socioeconomic status, or SES. And other studies have shown that low socioeconomic status does indeed disproportionately contribute to health disparities, and SCS is on average lower in African American and Hispanic populations than in white communities. And so we can see here that some of these social determinants of health clearly are affecting health disparities. Okay, what about genetic determinants of health? We really don't talk about that too much in BPH LUTs. And so is there any data out there that would even suggest that there might be genetic determinants of health? We know from studies in prostate cancer that there are in fact genetic variants that increase risk for prostate cancer development or progression. And recently, there was a genome-wide association study published that found, or reported, I should say, 23 genome-wide significant variants located at 14 loci between BPH-LUX and control patients, all of European ancestry and mainly of Icelandic ancestry. And these variants did not actually overlap with those reported for prostate cancer. So it's not inconceivable that there may be some genetic underpinnings associated with BPH-LUX development and progression. However, we don't know if those are the same in different populations or not, because similar studies have not been accomplished for individuals of non-European ancestry. There is, I want to say though, some light at the end of the tunnel here, because a recently funded Chan Zuckerberg Initiative study, an atlas of the human prostate across ancestries, and Doug Strand, who's probably here somewhere, is a co-PI of this, might provide some much needed data on this. And so we might actually be able to get a handle on whether these genetic variants are the same or different between populations and whether they contribute to BPH-LUX development or progression. Okay, but are we just kind of being silly here, trying to look at genetic variants? There hasn't been much done in this area at all. So is it even a thing to look at genetic determinants of health in terms of health disparities? And the answer might actually be yes. And here's an example where if we look at the APOL1 gene, which exists in its wild type form, as well as two variants called G1 and G2, allelic variants characterized by these alterations. These allelic variants are highly prevalent, about 30%, among people of West African heritage. And this includes African Americans, for whom the majority originated from West Africa. The reason why these allelic variants keep circulating in the gene pool in the population is that they're highly protective against death from trypanosomiasis, so from trypanosomes, which are a parasite that's kind of endemic to that part of the world. So that's the good thing about these alleles. The bad thing is that they also contribute disproportionately to chronic kidney disease, leading to end-stage kidney disease in African Americans. So we know this. We know that actually the upper urologic tract suffers by having these germline variants inherited. So have we looked at the lower tract to see if these APOL1 allelic variants might contribute to the development or progression of lower urinary tract disorders? No, we haven't, but we probably should. And so this kind of knowledge could lead us down some roads where we could look at genetic determinants and determine whether or not, in fact, they are part of health disparities in benign urologic disease. So why am I talking to you about this of all people? It's because I'm actually part of an effort, another U54, but funded through NCI, that's focused on cancer health disparities. And that's in conjunction with colleagues from the Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Institute. And we have actually determined that we have to develop resources towards closing the cancer health disparities gap. And so we are simply lacking some information and some tools that we really need to look at health disparities. In the benign urology world, I think we need the intent, so we have to want to do this. And we need resources to understand and close these health disparities gaps in benign urologic disease. And by that I mean, we have to make a conscious effort and perhaps even a requirement to properly annotate human data with ethnic origin. This is not done nearly as much as it should be, and even self-reported ethnic data is better than none, and that is a definite gap that we need to address. So our databases do not have the data there that they should. We need a conscious effort and requirement for inclusion in studies involving human subjects. We need to have ethnic diversity represented in the specimens and data that we are able to use, and we don't have that, so that's a gap. Certainly we need money. This is a gap that's been bridged. There is a PAR addressing health disparities and NIDDK diseases. All the institutes have a similar PAR. So there's money to look at health disparities, okay? That's not the problem. And what we do need though is some assistance with access to inclusive biorepositories or databases. An example is the Veterans Administration Million Veteran Program, or MVP. This is a voluntary research program to help researchers understand how genes affect health and illness. It will be diverse, it is very inclusive, If you're outside the VA system, it is right now very difficult, if not impossible, to get access to the information and specimens there. We actually need that. And so we need to find ways to do that. So that's a gap. And there's probably other databases and biorepositories out there that are maybe not so accessible to us as researchers, and we need to try to bridge that gap. So in doing so, if we can actually find these resources and the intent to pursue health disparities research in benign urology, I think that ultimately we will be able to achieve health equity. And I think that's something we can all get behind.